Hang tight, everybody. All right, welcome everyone to the John Lavenia Success Mastermind Network for our general session today, Tuesday, January 5th. I am Stuart Wilde, your humble host today. Glad to be with you guys today. Glad to have an opportunity to dive into some topics and share some ideas with you guys and get into some cool discussions about mindset and personal development. Let me get a quick peek on the group view here so I can say hi to everybody, all my friends, Adrian and Julia and Gail and Elmer and Mark and Therese and Evelyn in California and Allie and Nicola and Ace and Suzanne and Daisy and Ivier and the magnet himself, John Lavenia, is joining us this morning. And we have Nancy, good to see you, and Kim, and Edward, and Janet, and Jane, and Linda, and Lindsay, and Susie, and Robin, and Emma, and there's even more. Oh my God. All right. So glad to be with you guys today. Welcome, everybody. Um, and today's topic is, every couple of weeks it goes by and I put together these sessions. I always kind of start out that 2-week cycle having what I think is an idea of what I'd like to bring to you guys and discuss. And what's interesting is that always kind of evolves, and maybe the other facilitators will testify to that sometimes what you might think you're going to bring before the group just kind of evolves and turns into something else. I've been thinking about the concept of the underdog, right? And let's say the myth of the underdog that we have retold through the generations, through the millennia, through the aeons. And I just wanted to revisit some of that in a new way. I'll share some ideas and a little book title, and some of you guys may have read, but I think I'm gonna just share my screen here and we will rock and roll. So buckle up, guys. Hold on a second here. All right. I'm glad to see you guys today. All right, look at that. So here's our title today. On Battling Giants, the myth of the underdog and the hero's quest. And this all just kind of came together last night. So, last few sessions we've delved into astronomy, right? We've talked a lot about like astrotheology and cool things like that. And so, I started out thinking about kind of the classic underdog story, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And it got me thinking about giants, and not only metaphorically speaking in the sense of obstacles or enemies to overcome or dragons to slay, right? And the path to personal empowerment, things like that. But what I found interesting was the more I started thinking about it, you guys, the more I started to do this trace of giants through history, right? And this here is one of the ancient Sumerian tablets, and this is the sun god Utu, also called Shamash. But if you notice, a lot of these ancient depictions of the gods are portrayed as these giants, right? So this is just an interesting depiction. This is really one of the earliest, pieces of stone tablature writing, and there's a depiction of this giant being with these smaller beings paying homage, let's say, right? And what's interesting is throughout history you kind of go from this, which is this like paying tribute, right? Ooh, hold on. To this, which is often the theme of the humans being subjugated by these ancient giant creatures, right? And on the far left, you can see, I think that is Enki, who is smiting one of the humans there. Very interesting. Next, we go to ancient Egypt, right? And we have a similar scenario where we have these ancient godlike beings, being attended to by the humans, which again, giants, big people, small people, very interesting. And then you go from this to that, right? And again, this very interesting scenario of where we start out with these mythical giant-like beings, going back to the oldest recorded times. And you go from this kind of happy, idyllic time to then this time where humans are, getting clobbered on the head by these giant beings. Pretty interesting. And of course, I don't know if you guys caught this, but they've traced giantism back to one of the pharaohs like 4,700 years ago. And so at one point there was a giant who was the ruler of Egypt. Pretty interesting. You guys, I was going to do this thing about Beowulf and Grendel, who is the giant, if you remember. And of course, Beowulf is the oldest recorded poem, goes back at least 1,000 years. I don't really know quite how far back it goes. And I was downloading pictures of Grendel, the giant, and I was putting them on my little slideshow, and they were just too scary. So I just took it off, and I'll just say, ooh, there was a giant in Beowulf. And those of you that read that classic epic poem know what I'm talking about. And then this is for our friend Bill McDonald in Ireland. Okay, these are the Fomorians, which are these ancient Irish giant beings, again, subjugating other beings. Very interesting. And then, oh look, that didn't come out very well, but that is Thor. Oops, sorry, hold on, guys. And that is Thor with his hammer there, and then the giant Skymir, which is also known as Loki. And then for you guys in the UK, you guys probably know more about Gog Magog than I do, right? This is a mythical giant from the British Isles. And then this is what I grew up with in terms of giant stories, right? Jack and the Beanstalk. But I just find it interesting, these mythical giant stories throughout history, right? And then, I kind of purposefully skipped over the biblical stuff, but I'm going to do a quickie on this, right? So then you get the Nephilim, which, in the Old Testament, in Genesis, right, it talks about the sons of God laying with the daughters of men and creating this, race of giant-like beings. Goes back into the Old Testament, right? So this is the Nephilim. And they've also been called the fallen ones. And so there's this interesting, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? You all know this imagery, right, of the fallen angel. Very interesting. And then that brings me to kind of our favorite giant story, right? And so, of course, we all know the biblical story of David and Goliath, right? And this has essentially been told to us as the classic underdog story that the little shepherd David, with nothing but a sling and a stone, defeat the giant Goliath, right? Who in biblical times, you go through these begats, from the Nephilim, and then you wind up with this race of giants, right? In old Bible times, thousands of years ago. Now, what's interesting is that we've all kind of been told this story of how David was the underdog, and that the odds were against him, and all this kind of stuff. And a couple of years back, I read through a book by a guy named Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants, right? And Gladwell turns the whole David and Goliath story on its head. And even in the Bible, there's references to Goliath. He needs help getting around. You can see he has somebody helping him hold his shield. In the scripture, he talks to David about don't come at me with your sticks, when David only had one. And so he had there's a lot of evidence that Goliath actually suffered from real hereditary giantism. And it's this very interesting way to flip this whole David and Goliath thing on its head. And what Gladwell poses is that Goliath is really not the one who's at the advantage here, and that he's this big lumbering warrior with all this armor. In the Bible, it says, what is it, 6 cubits and a span, which I had to look up, but that's like 9'9", right? So it was like a 10-foot dude, and there were real people like this back in the day. And the armor that he was wearing, would have weighed over 100 pounds and things like that. And then when David steps up to the plate, let's say King Saul tries to wrap a sword around his waist and have David fight Goliath on Goliath's terms. But really, the interesting thing is that David was a shepherd, right? And his weapon or protective defensive weapon, at the very least, was a sling. Now, if you guys didn't know this, the slingsmen were the infantry in the old world, right? And the slingsmen could take a sling stone, which could weigh anywhere from a pound or more, and hurl these things with deadly accuracy up to a couple of football fields, at like 90 to 150 plus miles an hour. Very, very interesting. And so when David stepped out, David was not just the peaceful little shepherd. He was actually a powerful warrior with his own weapon. And rather than face Goliath on Goliath's terms, David stepped back, used the sling, right? This simple, low-tech weapon. And as the story goes, right, he picks up 5 stones from the river, walks out on the field, puts one in his sling, whoop, 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 tosses this thing at deadly accuracy, hits the guy between the eyes, right, and the giant falls, and that's what we know. But again, to me, this is a way of rethinking this whole underdog myth. Okay, I want to share a couple other things with you about this. Okay, I don't know if you can see that all that well. This is a real exhibit from a museum with ancient sling and sling stones. These stones are about the size of a lemon. Okay, they weigh anywhere from 1 pound to 2 pounds each. Now, Gladwell did some geology on this, and in the valley of Elah, where this battle took place, there are high concentrations of a mineral called barium sulfate, and barium sulfate is twice as dense as other rocks. And so, not only did David pick up these stones with the expertise of a marksman, he also picked these stones up that happen to be twice as dense. And Gladwell did the calculations, and I've read other calculations as well, that say that with these stones, throwing these projectiles at that speed, these stones would have the impact of a .45 caliber projectile. So again, who was the underdog and who was the favorite in that one, let's say. Here's some cool quotes from Gladwell here. Giants are not what we think they are. The same qualities that appear to give them strength are often the sources of weakness. There's a set of advantages that have to do with material resources, and there is a set that has to do with the absence of material resources, right? And so, when you're talking about the David and Goliath story, right, obviously Goliath had all the resources, the armor, the weapons, all that kind of stuff. David, went out on the battlefield with, some stones that he picked up in the river, right? So there's really this interesting concept of resourcefulness of the underdog and working with what you have, but also I had to pull up. Thank you. I've been waiting all morning to throw this one up there for you guys. So if you as a child growing up in the States, right, I remember watching reruns of Underdog, right, and Sweet Polly Purebred, and there was always this there was always a contest of who could sing the Underdog theme song the fastest or whatever it was. And those of you that are from the UK and didn't grow up with Underdog or didn't know about Underdog, take a peek. It's cool stuff. It's an old cartoon. But anyway, when starting to talk about underdogs, and of course that's the first thing that comes to my mind. I couldn't get through the session without giving props to Underdog. But really, what we're talking about here in business, right? I'm trying to make an analogy to our e-commerce businesses and our entrepreneurism, right? And it's often daunting. It often feels like you're up against the giant, right? Even just thinking about our interactions with with Amazon and Bezos, right? But when you're reaching out to suppliers or you're dealing with business contracts or anything like that, right? There's this tendency to be intimidated, to feel like the little person. And so I really wanted to kind of draw that comparison between the classic underdog story and how that might relate in our e-commerce businesses. Okay. And so I want to talk for a minute about what I call the underdog mindset. Okay. And really, number one is just like we've been learning in our mindset principles, right? You gotta want it. If you're an underdog, then you're hungry, right? And you have a desire. And sometimes that's, like Napoleon Hill and others tell us, sometimes that desire is a desire to just kind of show people that may not have believed in you that you could do it. Whatever your desire is. If you have a burning desire to do something, then of course that is going to give you the unfair advantage, as John likes to say, on your path, right? When you're an underdog, you have the ability to stand firm on your principles, on your values and your purpose, right? You should be much more connected to your core, and what we were talking about even last night on book study with John about your core values based on principles. You tend to be more humble when you're the underdog, and have more of an ability to learn, right? And to discover special talents, skills, abilities. I'll even say superpowers, right? Maybe jot down what you think your superpower is, because that really is, we were talking about David and how, everybody thought that he was just, gonna take a big beating. And of course, became victorious. And you could call that that was his specialized knowledge that really brought David to victory. Right? There's something about not having a title to defend, if you guys can understand that concept, right? So when you're the underdog and you're hungry, you're not necessarily coming from this place of trying to defend a title. You're more likely to be let's say less distracted, more laser focused, more goal driven, right? Again, underdogs are resourceful. You have the ability and understanding to work with what you have. You're more likely to have that real grit and that real determination to go the extra mile. You're much more likely to have a better positive attitude about obstacles, challenges, and overcoming adversity. This also brings us to that 100% commitment. Absolutely no escape plan, no plan B. Failure is not an option. And really, in general, you're just an overall badass. You're a Jedi warrior, right? And so that the underdog mindset is really, really powerful to me. And what I thought was pretty cool was there were some studies done where they did these task expectation studies, and they put people into 3 groups. And there were several versions of this study that I had seen, but essentially these were all done in corporate or business environments where they took 3 groups of people. They either gave them a task or they had them work together in groups. One group they told that they had very high expectations that they were going to succeed in the task. They told another group that that their chances were okay, about 50-50. And then the last group was the underdog group, and they kind of said, oh, you're probably not going to succeed. You could try if you want, but they kind of gave these guys low expectations. And it's almost the opposite of what you would think would happen, right? At first you might think that if people are given high expectations, then they're going to be better at succeeding or have a higher rate of success. And what was interesting in these studies is that it was kind of the opposite of what happened, okay? And so that the underdogs actually performed better. Because they were told that they couldn't do something, they became more motivated to do those things. They were more likely to find creative solutions to problems that they were given. They were more likely to work better together. They created a healthier work environment. They had a more positive attitude. They had a greater degree of level of satisfaction for the tasks that they were completing. So even in a workplace environment, right, having that attitude is a huge thing. And then I want to talk for a second about what I'll call the underdog hero's journey. Many of you guys know Joseph Campbell's work on myths and the power of myths and the hero's journey. I'm going to kind of tweak this in a little way just to talk about the underdog mindset here. So typically the underdog is a humble person, right? An unassuming person, a common person. And the ones, I'd love for you guys to, share with me later your favorite underdogs, right? But I immediately think of like Frodo and the Quest of the Ring. I think of, Luke Skywalker as, the underdog. I think of Rocky, right? Yo, Adrian. But, I think all throughout history and culture, we humans love the underdog story, right? We cheer, we root for the underdogs, right? So at some point, our hero gets a call to adventure or a call to action to do a task or a quest. Typically, the odds are not in your favor, right? And you're expected to fail. And when I think about the 80-20 rule, and those of us here in this success group, right? I believe that we're in the 20%. But in general, for most folks, right, the odds are not in their favor in terms of success, right? I remember even in scouting, and maybe some of you guys, maybe Mark, you're an Eagle Scout, or some of you guys are Eagle Scouts, but I remember going through scouting as a scout leader and learning that only 5% of scouts that go through scouting actually become Eagles, right? And the odds are not in your favor of success. So just by being in this group, right, we've all leveled up to the point where our odds for success are exponentially greater than your average person, let's say. Those heroes are at a perceived disadvantage, and I want to say perceived, right, because David's disadvantage was not really a disadvantage, but it was a perceived disadvantage. And then there's this refusal, which is almost like this coming from a place of fear or comfort, right? The hero doesn't want to go. The hero doesn't want, like the reluctant hero, right? And then at a certain point, the hero accepts the call. Then there's a mentor phase and an apprenticeship phase. And I know all of that rings true with you. I don't even have to say, right? And then in that process, right, the hero discovers, a hidden talent, a skill, an ability, a power, right? Luke Skywalker, with the Force, Frodo with, his kind heart and his ability to, be pure and innocent and dump the ring. And then, of course, then comes the test, the challenge, the trial, the ordeal, the dark night of the soul, right? You kind of dive deep into the abyss. And then there's a rebirth or a transformation. There's a gift and a reward component after you go through your trial or your ordeal, and then you return to the village, let's say, with the elixir, with the wisdom, with the knowledge, with the gift, with the magical talisman or whatever it is. Now check this, right? Last few gigs I've like shown, some circular diagrams, right? And some of that was zodiac, right? But if you look at this 12-step journey of the hero's path here, again, it's 12 steps. It looks a whole lot like the zodiac. It looks a whole lot like the clock. It's really very interesting. Again, everything's broken up into 12s like this, right? So what I thought was cool about this little journey, this little diagram about the hero's journey was that it identified the inner journey and the outer journey, right? Because we all know as above, so below. And so, we have these experiences, sort of external and physical, but then, in our psyche, there's a replication of that, right? As above, so below, as within, so without. So quickie through this, right? You start out in the ordinary world, the normal world, right? You get a call to adventure, or you're, asked to complete a quest, right? You refuse the call, then you meet the mentor, then you cross the threshold, you have some sort of initiation, there's tests, allies and enemies, right? Often there's like supernatural forces that come to the hero's aid. Then there's this sort of like, and what's interesting is that, let's say 6 o'clock here, right? But in the Native American medicine wheel, that is the winter solstice to the south, right? If we were looking at this like a cardinal point, and an ancient calendar. This would be to the south. So you go into the darkness, into the cave during solstice, right? And then you come out of this ordeal, this trial of the soul, and then you're reborn. You get the prize. Then you start going back to your peeps. There's a resurrection element. You return with the goods, and then your quest is complete. And of course, that is the outer journey, right? And then it's mirrored by this inner journey of first you're not really aware of the problem. Then you kind of you become aware of a problem and a need for change. You have fear or resistance to that change. Then you overcome that fear, usually with the help of some sort of a teacher, right? You make a real commitment to changing yourself. You're experimenting with new conditions. You're preparing for a major change, and then you kind of go through the big ordeal. There's consequences, right? And usually some sort of a resurrection, a rebirth, a new life, right? New challenge and rededication. Final attempts, last minute danger, always sort of at the end of the movie, right? There's always the plot twist that maybe it's not going to work out for the hero, right? Then you work out the problem, and then you complete the cycle. So many of you guys know the hero's journey, and I know we could spend a lot of time on that, but to me this really speaks to me in a lot of ways. And let's see what else we got here for you. Nice. All right. So before I close this out and open it up for discussion, again, really this like the image of the sling to me, evokes this concept of resourcefulness, and of course brings up the underdog, but not in the way that we've all been taught, right? The concept that we all have hidden abilities, latent abilities, hidden potential to unleash, and how can we use, how can we identify our skills even as a perceived underdog? What makes you different, right? How do you show up in the marketplace in a way that's different than the giants, right? How is that going to set you apart? How is that going to differentiate? How is that going to lead you on a path to success? So there you go. Look at that. I kept it under a half hour today. All right, I'm going to unshare my screen, and we will chat here for a minute. Yeah, guys, so that's kind of what's been on my mind, this concept of the underdog, of the hero's quest, and how that applies in my own life. And I find that especially seasonally, and you guys probably noticed that, the last few general sessions that I've hosted with you guys, the theme has been really about, this seasonal journey, right? And whether it's celestial or terrestrial or internal, but this concept of the cycles and the seasons, and how much, how strong of a tendency it is in the wintertime. Maybe you guys, don't feel that at all, but I feel pretty sensitive to the changing of the seasons and the cycles of the year, to the point where, when it's dark, I want to hibernate, right? I tend to, be more introspective. I go within. And for me, this is sort of an annual thing. And now I feel like, we've got the new year, right? We're past solstice, the days are getting longer. And so personally for me, I feel like, the light is coming back, right? And I feel like I'm on this upcycle of my own hero's journey. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that. Does this resonate with anybody? Leah teases me that I have a hero complex, and I guess I'm guilty of that. And maybe anybody else that feels the same. But this kind of cycle, this concept of going on a quest, even if it's just within yourself, to know yourself. All right, I see Julia's hand up. I want to say hi to Julia. How are you today, Julia?
Hey, I'm good. This brings to mind a couple of things. One, and I don't know enough about this to sound intelligent, but I'm just going to put it out there. A friend of mine, Christine Vincent Haler, did her doctoral thesis on Beowulf with Beowulf as the bad guy. and Grendel is the good guy, because Beowulf was the bad aggressor. And she came at it from a Christian perspective, which I didn't quite understand, but I haven't read her thesis. But anyway, it was really interesting to hear her talk about that. And the other thing that came to mind in the hero's journey is, as we're talking about Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and Queen Scouts and whatever, Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. You always knew they were going to come out on top, but they went through the whole cycle. And I think that's what engaged so many of us as young readers, was we got to be on the hero's journey with them.
That's a great point. Thank you. That's a great point, Julia. I want to say I read even just last night that George Lucas claimed to have, been inspired by Campbell's interpretation of the hero's journey with the whole Star Wars, trilogy originally. And of course, we all know that those make the best stories, right? The best movies, the best books, whatever it is, follow this formula. And you know what? I really think that's a great sort of way to connect, mythology and business. Because I think, even these presentations, right? I remember when I first started doing, and maybe some of you guys that are facilitating, or some of you guys that put on, multimedia presentations or whatever it is like this on Zoom. It's obviously the way of the future, the way of the world, the way of the present, right? And I recently read a book. It was a multimedia book called Resonate by a woman named Nancy Duarte. You guys should check it out. There's a free version online. I have a buddy that works for Apple, and he told me when we started this whole Blue Sky thing that Apple had just hired her to essentially redesign their whole corporate platform to accommodate for these multimedia presentations, right? And so one of the things, if you look in, if you check out Resonate, a big part of what she suggests in terms of how to put on really engaging presentations is to make even these little 15-minute, 30-minute sessions, whatever, sort of follow that format of the hero's journey, right? Does that make sense, right? If you want to bring people in, you make people the hero of the story. And so how can we do that in our own businesses, in our own copy, in our own listings, right? Can we take people on a hero's journey, even on our product description on Amazon or whatever, however you're putting yourself in the marketplace? Thank you, Julia. I'm going to go to our fearless leader here. So nice to see you, John. How's it going, buddy?
Hey, good. Thank you, Stuart. I'm just looking for the raise hand feature. I wound up setting up global shortcuts, alternate option Y raises the hand. Are you guys seeing this on your end? Is the raise hand command gone? Sorry, that's like completely off topic. But anyway,
no, it's there, John. It's visible. You can raise your hand.
Okay, must just be on my end. Thank you, sir. The Underdog, man, David and Goliath. I've referred to David so many times in lectures, because there's aspects of that story that go untold, or at least when I was a kid, like in Sunday school, David and Goliath, and what's the point? I don't know. Did I ever get the point? What's the point? And so you just gave me a few things I didn't know about that particular Underdog story. The part that I like to park on a bit is where, whoever defeats Goliath gets, to marry the princess and live tax-free for the rest of his life, right? So always thinking about, the reward. Here's the carrot. Right now, Goliath's not such a big deal. He is a big target, which is, I guess, advantageous, right? So, but here's the thing. I think that so often it's so easy to fall into agreement with the idea that this is insurmountable, this problem, this Goliath, this thing, this is insurmountable. And I'm, how much, effect can I have on this Goliath? Man, it's so easy to fall into that. And then you mentioned seasons. Stuart, this was such an insightful talk. Oh my goodness, this was so insightful. I don't like seasons. That's why I live in Arizona. I don't want seasons, right? I want sun. And I got it. You asked for it, you got it, right? I bought that deal. Now, it is cooler here in the winter. I do enjoy, not being at 120 degrees outside. That's a nice reprieve, right? There's about 4 months a year where you just don't want to go outside in Arizona. In southern Arizona. Northern Arizona is nicer. But but I want consistency. I want to set stuff up and have it be right, and then never think about it again. And this is probably unreasonable. This is unreasonable. Okay, so like the way I run my office, it's exactly this way all the time, every time. I never have to clean up because it's never disorderly. It's always exactly the way I set it up. There are no seasons in my office. Okay. And sometimes I want that to exist out in the marketplace or in my daughter's bedroom or, you know, in other environments that I don't have complete control over. But just like the book that we're reading, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, personal victories precede public victories. So I'm thinking, all right, I can't just, you know, be alone in this and like have everything my way. I've got to interact like with others and stuff. So maybe we're on exactly the right book, right? Chapters 1, 2, and 3, or habits 1, 2, and 3, and 7, sharpening the saw. If you haven't read the book yet, anyone, you'll get to it. But chapters 1, 2, and 3 are all about public victories. Private victories, personal integrity. I'm good, better than I was, right? I'm not perfect, but I'm good. Sharpening the saw. Yeah, here we are. We're all sharpening the saw right now. We're showing up on this. And that's not seasonal, man. But like the other 3, yeah, I suppose I'm good, but still my consideration about synergizing. This is the thing. If I'm looking at life as Goliath and I'm the underdog, how do I synergize? That's been the sticking point for me throughout my life, where I would assume more of an antagonistic role with Goliath than how do I synergize with that, right? Or is there a season for synergizing with that? No, it's always this way all the time, every time. It's always this way. There are no seasons, says my best thinking. Okay, but are there ways to? Here's Amazon, right? Can we synergize with that? And I guess that's up for debate, right? We've got people that would say yes and people that would say no to that. Is it easy to do? Not necessarily, but are there ways to expand? Let's say as a marketer, as a business person, are there ways for me via this Goliath to expand my reach into a customer base that I would have never had access to without millions of dollars worth of advertising? Yes, there are. Is it easy? No. Is killing Goliath easy? No. Nobody said it was going to be easy, right? But if we can if we can exploit and capitalize on our own skills, advantages, aptitudes, right? David knows how to use the sling. By the way, 200 to 300 yards with a 1-pound rock with primitive, elastic something. How do you do that? I don't know. We use firearms around here. In fact, tonight on Adventures in Mindset, we're doing preparedness part 3. And yes, we will be talking about force equalizers. I'll leave it at that. If you're interested in such things, show up. Anyway, Stuart, you got a whole lot of thoughts going. I was actually exercising while you were talking. I was listening to you doing push-ups and stuff. Nice. And I'm thinking, you know what, man? The season is for me to get my ass in shape. That's what season it is right there, because it was pathetic. All right. Thank you. Done.
Love it, man. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, dude, I'm feeling the change in the seasons, right? And I definitely feel a shift in my own inner world, let's say, and I know that part of that is a reflection of the outer world, and let's say a lot of that is credit to the mindset work and the principles that you share with us. You made an interesting comment. I mean, I think one of the things that, in terms of seasons, right, and one of the things that Napoleon Hill talks about, right, is that there's a season for everything, right? You've talked to us about the Hermetic principle of the law of rhythm, right, and that everything has an ebb and a flow, and goes in these pendulum cycles. And I think this even touches on what we were talking about last night with the degrees of the different virtues that came out of the center. Were of different degrees, right? There is no extreme. It's always a movement between those two extremes, right? And honestly, man, while I was researching some of this seasonal mindset stuff, which was really more geared towards like the gig I did a couple of weeks ago with you guys, kind of around Christmas time and solstice time, but that concept of seasonal mindset and seasonal markets, right? And so even just from the understanding that, guess what, the seasons change, and people aren't buying bathing suits anymore, or people aren't buying snow shovels anymore, or whatever that is, right? And so even just from the understanding of the needs of the market, and being able to keep our fingers on those pulses. But then there's also, again, this concept of people spend more, during holiday time. Maybe that, part of that is a way that people, obviously we have consumer-based holidays and things like that, and our whole economy is based on that whole Q4 thing. But there is an aspect that people spend more money to make themselves feel better, right? During the off season, during the darker times, right? So, I'll go back to Napoleon Hill and organized planning, right? So if we understand that the tides are shifting, if we understand that the market trends or shopping trends or buying trends are different, then we can plan accordingly in our businesses. No. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna call out our buddy Cyril. What's up, my brother Cyril? How are you, man?
Hi. Yeah, loved your loved that. Loved your talk today. I was just thinking about the the hero's journey. Sorry. And I've been trying to work quite a bit on my storytelling and so on. And so thank you for that, because it fills out a few things. It's amazing the amount of stuff you can get on storytelling on the web now. It's amazing, plans and outlines and on how to write all sorts of stuff. But and it's interesting because I've been thinking quite a bit about the hero's journey, or what do they call it? I've forgotten. In marketing, there's a number of ways they look at it in terms of storytelling, and it's quite a big thing now, and it works because in people now really love stories. We are bombarded with stories all the time, and the public still love them. The only thing is, though, I've noticed a little bit of a change and a bit of a movement. I've noticed that some marketeers are trying to put them into emails, and to be honest, I realized it's unless you've got a really good story and it's short, trying to do those stories in emails is I'm bored by it. As soon as I see it, I don't want to read it. I just turn it off. I won't read it because I can't be bothered, or I'll go straight to the bottom and look for the ending to see what they're really getting at. So I think it has its place in a place where we actually want it, rather than being forced upon us, rather than having to read a whole long email. I've read some other interesting stuff from a marketing point of view about writing long emails, and long emails are not a good thing anyway. So but it's really interesting from a marketing point of view, because when you're sending out your emails to your buyers and so on, or your email list, the rule of thumb is short emails. Don't spend too much time getting to the point, and tell the story only where it's appropriate. But I love stories, and I've been trying to improve my storytelling for quite some time, because in terms of trying to tell my own story. So yes, I love the parallels. Thank you, Stuart.
Right.
Well done.
Nice. Yeah, I think you hit on an important point, is that not only do you love stories, Cyril, but we humans love stories, right? And really, you go back as far as you can go back, and it's all about the stories that people share and the stories that people, let's say, believe and spread, right? And it's really what our societies and our civilization is actually based on, are stories that we all collectively agree upon. So very cool. And yeah, even just reiterating that concept of how can we use the fact that this hero's journey is this really archetypical way of understanding and way of seeing the world. And when we can present a hero's journey to our customers, to our clients, then it invites them, a call to action, a call to adventure, complete a quest. And we humans love that stuff. And especially if there's, an underdog component. Yeah.
But
So
also because it provokes emotion in terms of feeling for or against a particular protagonist. So and hence the call to action, because it then helps that call to action. But yes, absolutely. But also storytelling, I mean, really started as verbal spoken word,
right.
rather than
Oral
written.
traditions, absolutely.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And you know, a lot of it was like, hey, how do you get down to the river and fill, you know, get water? Or where was the herd of bison, or whatever, right? How do we communicate information? And of course, later those stories really revolved around the more esoteric, right? And the meaning of life and what happens when we die, right? And these are the oldest questions that humans have been asking, and that reminds me of our book study last night with this, you know, go to your own funeral and you know, listen to what people say about you, kind of thing. Pretty fascinating.
You,
But
you
yeah,
just
go
you
ahead.
just reminded me of storytelling in gospel songs, about the black tradition. And it's interesting that there's a whole a secret storytelling within it, in terms of saying, if you go down to the water, it means when you escape. It's about escaping and using the water because the dogs won't smell you. So
Right.
it's
Well,
interesting.
again, stories as a way to communicate. Totally.
Yeah, interesting.
That's fantastic.
Very
Well,
cool.
yeah. And again, you know, knowing that about us, how can we use those things to our, you know, on our path to success? Ivier, how are you today? How about here?
Hey, Stuart. Hey, everyone. Great story today. And what was coming up for me as you were talking was, I'm not sure if Napoleon Hill mentioned it, but I know Steve Covey has definitely mentioned it in the book, that it's not the problem per se, but it's how we see the problem. So it's our you know, perspective on the problem. And so it just came to mind that it's amazing how the giant in every story is in the minority. They're not, you know, that many of them, right? And so you would think the underdog being the majority, because most people are much smaller than the giant, that there would have been a lot more hands up going up for, you know, the role of, you know, I'm going to save my people, as, you know, we're all the underdogs. But, you know, as history shows, it's the very few. And in most cases, it's just the select one that stands up and agrees to actually take up the, you know, the battle or mantle, or you know, do the task. And so it's really interesting. So that was one. And then secondly, I think, you know, even if David was not the greatest marksman, right? This is a giant. So the way I look at it is, he's a big target. I mean, if I just focused on his chest, there's a lot of mass there, right? So even if I miss slightly to the left or slightly to the right, it's going to hit something, right? When I think about the size of what his head must have been like, even if David shook, you know, even if he was in fear, he still acted regardless of the fact that he was afraid. He still went for it, right? And he swung that thing with all he had. And it hit, right? So whether it hit his eye or his nose or his mouth, that stone was going straight in. It was just, you know, I think to make the story, you know, super wonderful, that it hit between the eyes, right? And sunk in because of the speed and the force at which this stone was, you know, was slung, right? So for me, it's always, it's not about, you know, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be courageous. You don't have to be unafraid. It's just acting in spite of the butterflies in the stomach, in spite of the fact that you're the select, you're the minority, you're probably the only one with your hand up, wanting to stand, you know, up for your people. So that was what was coming for me on the David and Goliath story. So yeah, I think from that perspective, David had some advantages, clearly, because Goliath as a target was a massive target, you know, even from a distance away, you know, he could still pick what part of Goliath's body he wanted to aim for, right? I mean, there was a lot of, you know, space. There was a lot of body to hit, right? And then I think of the business sense. Most large corporations, so large businesses who've existed for years and years and years, are not agile. They find it very difficult to change strategy, to change direction, to be innovative, to change their production lines. You know, very few actually set up their organizations such that they move with the changes, they move with the times, they move with the seasons. And so that's why they get obsolete, and some newcomer on the block takes their market share, right? And before you know it, they've gone under, right? So very few big organizations, one, can respond with the speed that sometimes is necessary. But when you think of the small, operation, the one-man business, the solo enterprise, the, mom and pop store on the corner, they can get whatever their clients want at the drop of a hat. So if they find that suddenly it's a particular kind of, cereal that everyone's asking for, they can go to the largest store and buy, however many cartons they can get their hands on and put that on the shelf and start selling almost immediately, right? So their ability and their response time is a lot quicker than the bigger organizations. So, we might be on Amazon, this great big engine, there might be 6-figure sellers on there, but you know what? We only have inventory of a couple of hundred. Maybe if our item is selling, we've gone maybe 500, 1,000, whatever. But if we need to change, we are so geared, right? That we can duck, we can dive, we can maneuver, right? Because our businesses are still in the budding phase. We're not this great big mass. We're not carrying a lot of baggage around. We're the new kids on the block, and we can see, seasons and styles changing. We can react a lot faster. So there's a lot of, advantages for us, who are starting now in this, environment where, e-commerce is the thing. I mean, yeah, in COVID, right? Everyone went online. So for those of us just going on Amazon, we're right place, right time, right opportunity. This is the best of times for us, right? Because we're just starting, so we can chop and change. We can get it right. If the first product isn't doing well, just set it off at a discount, get it done, get the next one up, right? But big sellers, it's going to take them a while to sell through the thousands they have in the Amazon warehouse, or even if they're doing fulfilled by merchant, they need a lot more time to get rid of the stock before they can replace it, unless they have obviously deep pockets if they've done their cash flow right. But you just find that most times the big guy just is not responsive enough. So yeah, there are advantages for us. So those were the things that were coming up for me as you were speaking, that, we should never think less of ourselves. We should never think inferior. We should never think woe is me. We should never think, oh, I haven't got the wherewithal. We do have advantages. And if we look hard enough, we will spot them, and we will find those gaps in the market that we can go in fairly quickly and actually create market, and 2, take market share from existing players, right? So yeah, for me, it's all good news. I can see very little downsides, for us, because we're just at the right place, right time, and the things are changing in our favor. So yeah, that was what was coming up for me. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you. Boom. That's exactly what I wanted to hear from that. No, really. And thank you for your perspective. And thank you for reminding me, one of the things that, as I was kind of going through benefits of and advantages of being an underdog, is exactly what you're talking about, like not being set in your ways, right? And not being so big that that you have this slow response time. I really like how you kind of put that. And as entrepreneurs, as small business owners, we are much more adept at being light on our feet, adapting to changes, making quick decisions that we can execute in an efficient, effective, timely way. I liked what you talked about. Goliath is a big target, and yeah, if you know the scripture, yeah, it pops him right between the eyes and sinks right in his head. But to me, I look at that, and honestly, I envision John Lavenia, 50 yards, 100 yards away, with a sidearm, and here comes, big crazy Goliath, waving a sword or a spear. He's not going to make it. You're not going to get within 50 feet. And so, yeah, I appreciate what you were saying about that. And then the other interesting thing, like you mentioned, throughout history, it's always the few that control the many, right? And I think no matter what, however you look at it, from whatever perspective, from my own personal history, like how come they all got on the trains, to go to the camps or whatever, right? or prison camp scenarios or whatever it is, right? There's always a couple of people that intimidate through power and force, and everybody kind of conforms, right? Whether it's for fear or whatever it is. But I remember a few years ago seeing, it was like a little YouTube video, but it was essentially like a circle with a bunch of dots, and it was representative of like how many millions of people are kind of the common people, and how few of the dots are the ones that control everybody else. And in every situation, right, there's always this question of why didn't anybody stand up and do anything, right? And I think in some ways, we're seeing that across the globe in a lot of ways now too. The interesting thing about Saul and David, and what John was talking about too, like marrying the princess and all that and getting the prize, right? For David, it was interesting because what that did, you might wonder, well, why didn't King Saul go off and face Goliath, right? Because he was scared, right? He didn't want to. And that was the beginning of his downfall. And that was the event that set wheels in motion for David to become the king, right? And that was sort of his prize through all that. But it was based on the inaction, indecision of poor leadership skills, right? And so a new leader stepped up. That's a whole other interesting analogy. Thank you. Thank you so much, Evie. Elmer and Hung-san, good to see you guys. What's happening?
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Stuart, for the topic of conversation. It's always also Evie is such a hard act to follow, but she definitely sort of segued what I was going to say, what came up during your conversation, both from like the seasonal aspect and then also just having your eyes on the target. Like when you were mentioning that, I totally was just thinking of the slingshot target, and as well as Luke like shooting the last laser into, blasting the Death Star. But then as people were talking and what they were, speaking to storytelling, the whole notion of the underdog is based on someone's story. And with any story, you always have to take into account, well, who's telling the story? And I think even Koila had mentioned in her comments, it's about perspective, like who's telling your story. I think each of us, like as we are all on this different journeys together, we're our own storyteller. And I think like, as the underdog, is it defined by someone else's perspective that's encroaching on our own personal stories? And do we feel or believe that we are the underdog? I mean, and I think it's like tying to yesterday about keeping tight to having that target and that vision. And, just to what EVA said, like an underdog is somebody sort of like, insurmountable odds, but that's from somebody's outside perspective. The underdog themselves, they don't really believe that, or they're like, well, no, I can do this. And I think that's something that we should all, take it upon, that we're the ones telling our stories, and how do we want to define the way and what journey we're going to take. So that was it.
That's great. That brings up a couple of really good points for me. And again, yeah, perspective, right? Because it's not, and John's been telling us since day one, right? It's who's showing up and how we perceive things and how we deal with adversity and crisis. And I think you brought up an interesting point, Elmer, about, is that our own perception or is that an outside perception? And I was really trying to hit on the fact that I think that typically is more of an outside perception, right? It's more of the public perception. I would pose back to you guys, like, do you think David felt like he was the underdog? I would say probably not. I think he'd stepped right up, literally, grabbed a couple rocks, like all Mr. Smooth out the river, boom, back home for dinner. I don't think he thought of himself as the underdog at all. I think he spent his whole life out in the fields protecting his sheep, being able to hit a wolf, tracking his sheep a football field away or whatever, and that this was really just a, let me just take care of this and get back to what I was doing, kind of thing. And then, yeah, I think that to me just brings back really one of the purposes that I had with this was for us to look at this and redefine the underdog concept, right? And underdog, as you're alluding to, doesn't doesn't necessarily have to have a negative connotation. It doesn't have to have the connotations that we've associated with it. I think if we can come to the perspective of the underdog from somebody who has specialized skills, the ability to be creative in terms of strategy, right? As Olivier was talking about in terms of business, right? You're not sort of tied down or confined by a lot of the norms. Then I think we have greater potential for greater degrees of success. And yeah, I think the underdog is a good thing, right? And we went through all that stuff about all the advantages and traits. So yeah, thank you, man. Thanks for sharing. Koila, how are you, Koila?
Hi, I'm fine, and I'd like to say hello to everybody because I haven't been around for a while, but I've been doing an awful lot of working at kind of hours that don't fit in with things here. And just a couple of points that I'll try and keep short. Your underdog thing. I'm pretty sure David was fairly aware of what skills he had and was fairly sure how he could utilize them against said Goliath. And I think the thing about the underdog is everybody expects the underdog to lose, except perhaps the underdog who is aware of what skills that they have. So that's a thing to remember. And it does kind of feed into a point that John made about divine guidance that I'll come back to in a minute, because somebody made a point about people following along to the point where it actually cost them their lives. And that brings up for me a story about the frog and the boiling water, which I actually hate. I hate it because I can't imagine anybody doing this to a frog. But if you put a frog in water and then you bring it to the boil, the frog does not get out in time to save its life, because it just doesn't assimilate the information quickly enough in order to realize that if it doesn't get out, it's going to boil. And it's kind of like that, I think, with us. Unless you're a particular kind of person, you kind of go along and you can't believe that these horrible things might happen to you. You can't believe that other people might actually, do these things, and until it's too late and you can't get out. And that has happened to an awful lot of people, unfortunately, over the course of history. John made a point about divine guidance and David and other things, and that just brought up for me the fact that we all, it depends what you call that. We don't all call that divine guidance, because some of us find that kind of difficult as a word, but I tend to think of it how it occurs for me, which is as a small voice inside the voice of the universe, the cosmos, whatever you want to call it. And if I don't listen to that, I always regret it. So I try never to ignore what that small voice inside is telling me. And the more I listen to it, the easier it is to hear. So I would just say to everybody, just listen to your small voice inside that's giving you advice. And when you take it, say thank you. And if you don't take it and it's wrong, just remember. Okay.
That's wonderful, Koila. Thank you. Your first comment about David didn't think he was an underdog. He knew very well what his skill set was. He knew very well what his assets were and what his resources were, and was resourceful in the process of that. But yeah, I think that's an important part of the process for us, is this journey of self-discovery to identify what our superpowers are, what our skill set is, what the things that we're good at, and how, and again, that sort of don't play by the Giants game, play by your own game, right? And the ability to come up with unique strategies that are going to, give you a greater chance of success. And the still voice, right? Thank you for for reminding us, because no matter what we're talking about, that to me is tied with core values and principles and things like that too, right? So it's who we are at our center, and we shouldn't be making decisions that aren't coming from that place. So thank you. Julia.
I'll make it really fast. We're all underdogs in the Amazon marketplace. review, review, review. If you buy a product from one of our family, put a review up. And I will say that I bought the muzzle and I just reviewed it last night. I think it's amazing, awesome. And if you have back problems, I would recommend it. But anyway, we can help each other. Review.
Oh my God, Mazel Tov, as we say. Nice. Yeah, I love that product. Great product, Therese. Thank you. I know we're 5 after the hour. I see Cyril's up for another round. What's up, buddy? And then we'll close out with you.
Just a quick one. I just wanted to reply to or something Coiler reminded me of. The reason that Churchill knew what was happening and was ready to be leader for it was that he had just written a book about it, literally, in the years before. And as because he was a soldier during the First World War, his and his understanding and knowledge of history had literally made him write a book about the problems of fascism and its like. So when it occurred, he already knew what was going to happen. He already knew what Hitler was going to do because he had studied so much of history and of what he'd learned during the First World War that literally he had a book out already, and he knew he could see it coming. So that's why he was the leader he was at the time. So in terms of the Goliath story, Churchill knew what was going on. He was one of the few people, and also because he wasn't going with the crowd, so to speak. He thought outside the box rather than just following the crowd, which is why, and in terms of, for example, the financial markets, why so many people go under is because they follow the crowd rather than watching deeply themselves.
And by the time you jump on the bandwagon to sell,
it's
right,
already over.
It's
Yeah,
already
you're
over.
jumping on the end of the bandwagon,
Right,
which means it's going to the likelihood is it's going to go down at some point, because what goes up must come down. If you're lucky, the cycle runs a bit longer and you might make some money, but it's knowing when to get in early and when to get out just before. But that getting out just before is not easy either. So anyway,
yeah,
sorry.
well, again, that's cycles and rhythm, right? And understanding those cycles, and the better we can be at interpreting, predicting, and planning.
Well, but the markets are more about fear. When you get runs on the market, it's always about fear.
Well, and so does control, right? And that's what's, I think, interesting even about this concept of conformity, the few controlling the many, this push towards.
Well, sorry, actually, in the markets, I mean fear of loss, actually. So it comes under that particular set of rules rather than necessarily straightforward fear of an intimidation. But yeah, fear of loss, which is a classic thing one has to be aware of in selling. Absolutely.
Here is the great paralyzer or the great motivator, right? And it definitely encourages us to act or not and get run over, right? I mean, that's kind of deer in the headlights. All right, guys, it's 8 after the hour. I enjoyed our session today, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Thank you all for your input. Thanks for everybody for joining us today. Couple quick housekeeping items. We have General Hospitality Suite coming up here on the John Lavenia Network. And then at 5 p.m. Eastern, we have Corporate Curios with our dear friend Vivier Barnabas. And then this evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, we have another session of Adventures in Mindset. We're going to be doing part 3 of emergency preparedness, and by special request, John's going to join us. We're going to talk about personal defense and the 7th pillar of preparedness. So don't miss a special session of Adventures in Mindset. I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Great. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. Get stuff done.